I had a psychologist, Carlos Camacho, who was originally from Uruguay. He's a bilingual psychologist who completed his internship at Rivendell Adolescent Unit at Hospital Hospital. Having also worked in the disability field, Carlos is adept at working with people of all ages and has a wide experience in dealing with a spectrum of mental health problems. Carlos specialises in cognitive behavioural therapy for the treatment of anxiety and depression. Now, I first met Carlos earlier this year, and he was kind enough to provide me with a copy of his first book, a semi-autobiography, which is described as a semi-autobiographical psychological crime story with a licence to thrill. Now, if I could invite Carlos to the stage, so we're going to have an interview, and fingers crossed that it goes well.
This is for you, apparently, for the slides.
Oh, I get this for the slides.
Yeah.
Right, so you got the first one.
Do you want to sit here?
Yep, take a seat. Now,
No
just
worries.
make sure I've got the...
On?
Press the button. Yep, great.
1, 2.
1, 2, check. 1, 2, check. Yep, real good. Okay. So, Carlos, I mentioned that in 2017 you published your first book, Goodbye Charlie, a semi-autobiographical psychological crime story with a licence to thrill. So, who is Charlie?
Well, hello everyone. Firstly, Charlie is a semi-fictional character, but it's also, I think, like you said, it's very autobiographical in the sense that all the stories in the book are true, but nothing's about me. Just in case. My lawyer said to say that. So hopefully we're covered now. Charlie. Carlos, the name Carlos, as you know, is Charles. And so I thought I wanted to change everyone's name in the book just to make sure no one gets upset. And I did want to write everything, but I also, by the end of it, when it was getting published, I thought there's two things I still want after the book gets published. One is to remain married, so I had to leave a lot out, unfortunately. Yeah. But there is a third book. So and the other one is continue practicing as a psychologist. So I made it 13 plus, the book. Charlie is a bit of me and a bit of other people that I've met that have been able to get through life through struggles, making good and bad decisions in their life. And I thought Charlie would represent that person. But in the end, Charlie became someone totally fictitious.
So the book is written by Alastair, so I believe, who was commissioned to write an adverse account of your historic rise and breathtaking fall. So who is Alastair, firstly? Can you tell me a bit about Alastair, who was commissioned to write the book?
Yeah, Alastair's a fictional character. And I'm glad that you thought he was real, so it worked.
Yeah.
I wanted that Blair Witch style where everyone thought, ghosts do exist. And so I made a little introduction like Alastair was real. But no, I invented Alastair or Sable in 1994. I wrote another novel. And it was an existential type philosophical novel, which pretty much means it's boring. So nothing much happens apart from some guy taking a bus and looking at the world in different ways. And from that character stayed in my mind, and I loved the way Alastair was, which was a person who didn't speak much, was quite introverted, observant, but very cynical. And so you heard a lot of his thoughts when people were talking. He wouldn't say it out loud, but he would have this cynicism. And I thought, this is a perfect person to interview Charlie because he was polite, but yet he had a distorted view of the world. And so Alastair became the person who interviewed Charlie, and then the people who knew of Charlie, just to make sure the stories were true. And Alastair became, or is really, the main character because it's his journey through Charlie's life.
Yeah, so you talk about this journey. So as the story unfolds, Alastair starts to see things from Charlie's perspective and appreciate the effects of the nature and the environment on Charlie's behaviour. So what are some of the environmental effects first? So let's talk about the environmental factors that impacted on Charlie's behaviours as a child.
Yeah, Charlie, he came from a poor family and migrated to Australia when he was only 3 years old. And so people that start off like that start off not only on zero, on -0, because their parents have to adapt to a new culture, new language, and pretty much do any type of work, regardless of what preparation and qualifications they've had overseas, especially in 1970. So he grew up at a time that I call in Sydney's West, which I call in the book Unfairfield, and there was a bit of a clash at that time between kids, of course, but it also represented the greater view of society, which there was a bit of a clash between. We used to call it the Aussies and the Wogs, but now no one really cares, so it's all right. But at that time, it was relatively important. For Charlie, it wasn't too much of a problem because he spoke with an Australian accent. And he was left alone a lot. But he was caught in between that. Unfortunately, Charlie's family went back to South America in 1980, so he had to start again at 12 years of age. And that change for any adolescent, having to leave friends and start again in a country, now he migrating because he knew English but he didn't know how to speak Spanish. So starting from zero, just like his parents did, formed him in a way that made him quite alienated as an adolescent, but also had the double effect of making him very, very independent.
So you refer to the period when you returned to Uruguay as the Tabula Rasa period. I hope I pronounced that correct. What does that mean?
Tabula Rasa, the philosophers... Tabula Rasa is Latin for clean slate, and anyone that's read philosophy or is interested in it, they might have read some of the philosophers from the 17th century, like Immanuel Kant, and also we got Hegel, but more importantly, there was someone called John Locke, who talked about the Tabula Rasa, that human beings are born with a clean slate, so everything that they learn through environment is it's what makes them. Of course, we have different theories for that now, but I love the name Tabula Rasa.
It sounds good, doesn't it?
It sounds great. I wanted to use a Latin phrase. And so it was a Tabula Rasa period because it was like 12 years had to be wiped out and starting again. And that's what happens when you migrate to a new place. It's like going to a new world, basically. And when you're 12 years old, it's very difficult because you have no control of your life. So you just have to go where people ask you to, and then you have to attend school. There's certain responsibilities. So he started off again, and it worked in his favour and against him, of course. Against him, who wants to start again? It's very difficult. Imagine like having to start again your life, or losing your house and starting again. Starting again seems to have a negative connotation, but it also has a positive one. It allows the person to rebuild in a way that they can foresee it a lot better than what it was. So that's why we buy old houses and demolish them and build something nice. But it's a lot of work. And as an adolescent, when the person's trying to make sense of the world, it can become quite destructive. But for Charlie, it had a positive effect as well, in the sense that he had to mingle and had to live, work and study in a third world country, which allowed him to develop, I suppose, feelings for humanity that were quite different. He realised the struggle, and he also was capable of having to work for every single thing he had.
Now, you describe an incident whilst working in a travel agency that changed your view of people permanently. Tell me about this Josefina the Ugly. Who is she, and what upset you? What did she do to upset you?
Yeah, Josefina. Yeah, Josefina. Yeah, the chapter's called Josefina the
I
Ugly.
didn't pick up much accent.
Yeah. Yeah, Josefina formed me, I suppose, in a way, or Charlie, because Charlie was 15 years old. He was doing his year 9, was it? Yeah, well, we used to call it, what used to call it? I think year 9, we used to call it first form, second, third form, we used to call it, I think, in the 70s, yeah. And he was doing that at night time. So he was working in a travel agency Monday to Friday, Saturday mornings, from about 9 o'clock to 7 p.m, and then going to night school doing year 9. And at that time, Josefina was I suppose you could say, the manager of HR. Any managers of HR here? Yeah. My trauma's coming back now. And she was quite nice to start off with. What happened? Yeah. Unfortunately for them, I think it's not entirely her fault. What happened was my father bought a few tickets, because he liked travelling, as you may well see. And he made friends with one of the guys that sells tickets downstairs. And he wasn't liked by anyone. And they wrongly assumed that I was this guy's nephew or friend or someone, because my father talked to him about getting me a job there, and he kind of like said, yeah, whatever. And I started, so they thought, and they never gave me an opportunity to discuss actually my relationship with him. I actually had never even met him. So I started off on the wrong foot. They thought, oh, this guy's, jobs for the boys or something like that. And I was only 15, I suppose. But what happened, out of all the things I had to do, one of them was get private things as well. People say, oh, can you go and pay this bill for me? And so forth. So one of those times, Josefina asked me to pay a bill. It was her electricity bill. This was nothing to do with work. But when I went to do certain things, I passed by the place we paid electricity bill. I paid, gave her the receipt back, and she said, oh, there's no stamp on this. And I said, oh, no, but I paid it, so don't worry. Anyway, a month later, she received the bill again. What happened, the guy saw me coming, of course, took the money, didn't register it, and then I don't know how much it was. It must have been about $10. But and then that was it. I suppose Charlie, if you like, at that time didn't have the ability to, plus with the limited language skills, he didn't have the ability to explain or to do anything about it. But nothing really happened. She paid the bill, but she crucified Charlie.
Stole the money,
Yeah. And everyone else as well, because she was the boss. So for me at that time, those 6 months that I stayed later on were quite important in my development. Because I think I say there in the book that it was the graduation from boy to man that suddenly monsters and ghosts weren't things to be worried about in a child's life. It was actually people and how they can treat somebody unfairly. And so during that time...
Procedural fairness, just as an assumption that you stole the money and
you
had to carry that.
Yeah, and the assumption could have... Well, because it's happened to all of us. I mean, it's happened to all of us where sometimes, someone lends us money or you pay something you forget or whatever, and the other person kind of like doesn't say anything and it goes past, and then suddenly dawns on you, like, it can happen innocently that happens, but this was adults and this was like a 14, 15-year-old boy, and there was no explanation given, but they made sure that that his life was made totally hell at that time. So, that in a way formed him as well, I thought. And therefore, he developed some skills, but it also alienated him more from people.
Tell me about the sad-eyed girl. I'll try and keep things moving along a bit. The sad-eyed girl, what do you remember about her? Who was she, so that the audience know who the sad-eyed girl was?
Yeah, the sad-eyed girl was Charlie's first love at 18 in Argentina. And it lasted a whole 3 months. It was, one of those things that we've all remember people we meet from the past and think about how they affected us. And it was a start of Charlie's, it was a change for Charlie from no friends, from being alienated from a society he didn't understand and didn't understand him, to actually starting to form a relationship with somebody who appreciated him, and on top of that, he made a friend. So it was a good time for Charlie at the start, and she was just very important in his life at a moment of need. And funny enough, 13 years later, they bumped into each other again, and I think the sad-eyed girl came to me because, sometimes we see someone, when you meet someone after a long time, and you look in their eyes, it's the same person, you can actually, but there's something different, you know, the feelings are totally different, but the eyes are the same, and that takes us back. That's what nostalgia is, I think.
So when your father asked you to return to Australia with him, I think that late 1985, and you initially said no, you didn't want to go back to Australia. You didn't want to leave the sad-eyed girl, your newfound love. But to your surprise, your father didn't try and talk him into coming back to Australia with him initially. And so in the book, there's this quote: Charlie first wanted to come back to Australia. After he meet girl, he no wants. He think he wants. He no want because the brain have no expectation, but it's not permanent. The people need to have something, dream, hope. You know, before Charlie want people, after have people, I don't know, very complicated. It's better to let young people make mistake. So this concept about making a mistake, well, I guess firstly, what was it that, and then a bit later on you went and had a night on the beach and then you did decide to come back. So why did you change your mind to come back to Australia when basically that meant leaving a job that you loved, leaving your first love, and also a friend, you know, you'd always prayed for you. You made the decision to leave all of these things that you wanted and that you had to come back to Australia. It was clearly not an easy decision.
Yeah, I think when people, when you start again, if you're used to starting again, it's almost like a drug. It's actually quite addictive. For example, I love going to a country without doing any research and just getting off the airport and not knowing what's going to happen. So for some people it's a nightmare, but I think it's the way I was brought up, and so many changes in my life, I had difficulty with stability. And when I had that, I think that's all I wanted. I just wanted to get it. Once I had it, then I wanted to start all over again because nothing had happened. It's illogical, yeah.
You got what you wanted and then you threw it away.
Yeah. And I think that's the environmental factors of certain mental health issues of a person who finds it difficult to commit to stability and it needs that constant change. It's a double-edged sword. I suppose you're destroying to rebuild, but as long as you're rebuilding, you're continuing to function. But the problem is if you can't rebuild, and that's where people find it very, very difficult.
Now, the book alludes to some of Charlie's bad decisions in life, and there are including references to being convicted of fraud, criminal behaviour, driving without a licence, spending time with Ronnie Biggs, great train robbery for those that remember. But mostly leaves it to the reader's imagination to try and work out what that all means. But I guess what I wanted to explore with that is, well, how important is it to let people make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes?
I think my father was a very wise man. He still is. He's 84 years old and he's still doing very, very well. And he understood something that I didn't when I was 18. He understood that hope is temporary. And he understood also that when you're young, you get excited about something and that happiness doesn't last. And now through research in psychology, we understand that's true. In the Western world, we have this sense that we want to be happy all the time. And happiness doesn't work that way. There's a certain threshold of happiness. So between 1 and 10, if it's an axis, it would be about 5. So we have peaks and we have downs. And naturally speaking, we always go back to 5. You, I, Donald Trump, anyone here in this room, doesn't matter how much money you have, as long as you're healthy and you're not in pain, you're going to have those peaks. So what we want, equivocally, is that we want to maintain that 8 or 9 or 10 all the time, which is impossible. It's not part of human nature. And that's why they try to sell us things that we believe are going to make us happy, like a new car, new house, new jacket, and so forth. And it does make us happy, but it's very temporary. And my dad knew that at that time. So allowing someone to go through that is far better than explaining it like I just did.
So that's life experience. But people that have who made really bad decisions in life. So what are some of the tools and the strategies that they can use to help, I guess, get through that bad decision process?
Yeah, bad decisions are part of success. I mean, if you research anyone that's been successful in any field whatsoever, you read their biography, autobiography, you find they talk about all the times that they didn't succeed. I mean, Michael Jordan talks about all the times he missed a free throw to win a game, and he's won 3 from free throws and he lost 23, I think it was, from him. So, but we remember the successes, just like when someone's on stage and they're playing the guitar and they've got 100,000 people. We see that there, but there was a lot of work behind that, a lot of times where they were said no, like the author of Harry Potter had 11 no's before a publisher said yes. And so these people understand the law of probability, that there's going to be a lot of bad decisions, but there's also going to be a lot of no's, and that's just part of success. Really, the way you recover from a really, really bad decision is to take responsibility, to decide that it's one's own fault. There's nothing else that had influenced me, that I had the tools to make a right decision, yet I made a bad decision. Whether it's losing your license, whether it's getting done for fraud, whether it's starting a bad relationship, there's always a time where you can decide, okay, that was a bad decision. Now I'm going to try to turn that into a good thing by allowing that experience to help me make a better decision in the future. That's it.
Your psychiatrist, Dr. Putin, said that in later years your friendless, nomadic life made you psychologically unstable, and it was a miracle it hadn't led to a more serious personality disorder or becoming a psychopath, a serial killer, or even a terrorist. What is it about having social connections that helps people to function properly?
Dr. Putin, he was I think he was a bit too severe with Charlie, but it is true. I mean, in a sense, people that become those type of people through their experiences. So what happens is that what we need to do is focus on some of the aspects of our life that are good, in the sense of our family, our friends, and also have a good balance within that. So in order to have a fulfilling life, if you like, it's very important, I think, now at 51 years of age, where I've made a whole lot of very, very bad decisions in my life, and some of them have actually turned out okay, some of them didn't. But what I'm trying to do is just decide, okay, the ones I didn't, I'm not only accepting, but I'm trying to embrace that it's part of my life. I wouldn't be here, sitting here, none of us would be, if we hadn't made all those decisions. So but they're also just segments of our lives. They do not make the person. And that's what we have to try to overcome. That bad decision doesn't make a person. There's many, many other aspects of that person.
Now, Dr. Putin describes depression as a portable hell that attaches itself to us. It lies dormant in all of us, waiting, and cannot be cured, only managed. So, how do people identify depression in the workplace?
Yeah, depression is something that we talk about a lot, of course, and I think the main thing with depression, and some of the most important symptoms to look out for, are very difficult to pick up. We talk about depression. I mean, if I had $1 for every time someone walked into my office and said, I think I'm bipolar, I would be a multimillionaire. Bipolar, narcissist, all these terms now, everyone has them. It's incredible. But in order to fit into a certain diagnosis in the DSM, there are certain characteristics that have to be fulfilled with regards to time and intensity of those symptoms. When we're in our job doing what we've got to do, it's very hard to pay attention to other people's mental health. But it's important also that to see or to understand if someone does say something that's totally out of line, that may be a symptom of something else, but not necessarily. That might just be annoying. And so depression can't also be used in order to just justify things, but as individuals ourselves, I think we have to start with our own symptoms. And I think that's why I wrote the book. That's why I'm interested in psychology, and I always have been, because I wanted to make sense of my own mental health at a certain time. And in hindsight, it's a lot easier, of course, that when you're in it.
So I was recently listening to a radio interview, Jamie Lee Curtis on the new movie Halloween. Has anyone seen the new Halloween movie? Yeah, okay. We should. So in the interview, she was but the story, as I understand it, is Laurie, the character who was harassed by Michael Malloy 40 years ago. He goes to jail. She's waiting for him to come out to get her revenge. And so Jamie Lee Curtis is describing trauma. And she's like, well, that's what trauma does. Trauma, when it's untreated, uncured, uncared for, what happens is it breeds inside of us and makes us crazy, and it ruins and basically takes control of our lives and takes our lives away from us. And the only way that Laurie could get her life back was to actually have a confrontation with the cause, the person that caused her trauma. So, and which was pretty severe, basically had to go and kill the body. So what can people that have suffered major trauma do to diffuse the trauma before it builds up to the point that they have to do something crazy?
Yeah, trauma is basically what happens when the human being, the individual, experiences an incident or has an experience that is negative and has a long-term effect. So what happens is that the brain is protecting us. You have a car accident, you hear that big bang, you don't get hurt much, but it's still that sound, the experience of being in the car stays with you a lot longer than the physical injuries. So what happens the next time you go into a car, the brain doesn't understand that you have to get into a car. All the brain's saying is don't get into the car because last time you got hurt. So it's a defense mechanism. A trauma is a defense mechanism. So then you don't repeat that. The brain doesn't understand that you have to get into a car to go to work and so forth. It doesn't understand fun. That's why you have this adrenaline rush when you jump out of a plane with a parachute. All the brain's thinking is this is bad. But then parachute opens and you want to do it again. So you start convincing the brain that it's okay. And that's how we treat trauma, through exposure therapy. Is one of the ways where you get into the car a little bit at a time, do the breathing exercise, so forth. And the brain says, okay, the last 10 times nothing's happened, starts being convinced that it's okay. And that's how you treat a trauma with regards in a behavioural way, if you like. In a cognitive behavioural way would be looking at the situation and trying to change your thinking about it and using techniques in order to reconvince your brain that it's okay to get into the car. This was a one-off. This is a probability of us having an accident again. And therefore, with exposure therapy, that can help. But the trauma can't be avoided. It's a natural process that the brain uses in order to protect us from bad things.
So do you agree that some people need, though, who've had really significant trauma, who have to have a confrontation and do something crazy to diffuse their trauma? Are there some categories of trauma that are so significant that people just have to go crazy to get it out of the system?
Yeah, of course, and we call that closure in psychology. There are certain, we are limited legally by what we can do, of course, and I think being able to have that closure, whether it's having a confrontation with someone in the right way, then that's actually a good thing. Because what happens is that the brain decides that, okay, this trauma, now I don't need to continue with this defense mechanism because you've had your outlet. Now, if that can't happen in the real world, you can also do it through visualization. And we use that a lot in psychology today. Visualizing is exactly the same as doing for the brain. So a lot of sports people who are injured, if they can't train, they actually visualize training. It's the same neurological process for the brain. That's why we can think of a joke that someone told us 20 years ago and laugh today. For the brain, it's all pretty much in the present and happening. Now, the only thing we don't use is the muscles, of course, if we're thinking about training. But if we're thinking of a confrontation and we visualize it in real-time scenario, then that is a very, very good outlet. So that's one way of doing it.
So I'm just about out of time, but what can human resource professionals do to help employees who are suffering from mental health issues? What are the key recommendations as a psychologist that you would say to HR managers to assist employees who are suffering from mental health issues?
Well, we can do a lot because we spend a lot of time at work. Most of us spend more time at work with our colleagues than we do in our own home. So it needs to happen in the workplace as well as at home. We understand that corporations and organisations work with certain budgets. We understand that. But one organisation can do a lot just by implementing certain strategies. One is awareness, of course, like you're doing today here, but carrying that on a daily basis. Having, I think, going back to philosophy, I think is always good. I always use that in most of my lectures, because if we don't understand the foundations of something, it's very hard to know why we're doing it. We have to decide that mental health is part of society. It's part of the individual. It always has been. You read books from Homer and from Socrates and Aristotle. That it's been around for thousands of years. It's part of our being in a way. So sure, we would love to have employees that work 8 hours non-stop and don't complain and don't bring their problems at home and do not have mental health, but that's not the reality. We need to have backups for people in order for them to be able to say, okay, I can speak up to certain people, I can access help, and this is not going to affect my job. I think that's the first thing people have to understand. It's just like anything else, just like other minority groups that it's advanced so much in the past, and people aren't scared anymore to speak up. With mental health, there seems to be a different issue aside from the other things that have developed, because it almost seems that either one, the person can change and doesn't want to, or two, they can't change. So they're actually not good for the organisation, for anyone else. And that may well be true, because some disorders are very, very difficult to treat, and it might not necessarily be wise for that person to have that type of job because it's very stressful. But that person needs to be included in that talk, I think.
All right, I'm now going to hand over to Ignatia, one of my colleagues, and we're going to now have a debate. So if you could stay there, Carlos.
Sure.
And if you could come up to the stage.
Where are my other debaters?
Joe, if you could make your way up, and Liz, Fiona, sorry. You on that side.
There you go. So we're in the yes, are we?
Yes. Start off with the yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, the debate topic: should serious misconduct and serious breaches of the code of conduct be tolerated in the workplace if caused by a mental health issue? Now, our debaters. On the negative team, we have Joe Murphy right at the end. Joe is the National Director of the Australian Business Lawyers and Advisors. Joe has specialised in employment and industrial matters for private and public sector employers since 2001. Joe provides clients with strategic advice on discrimination, unfair dismissal, bullying, general protections, including adverse action, harassment and contractual issues. Also on the negative, we have Liz Rook, who is a legal practitioner and an industrial officer with local government New South Wales. So I'm sure most people in here would know Liz by her work. On the affirmative, we have, it was actually a good thing. On the affirmative, we have Carlos, who needs no further introduction after that fantastic interview. And Fiona Campbell. Fiona is the Executive Manager, People and Culture for Georges River Council. She's got extensive experience in leading the human resources function for both public and private organisations. Alright, we are going to kick off with the affirmative side. Allocated about 5 minutes each. I will give a little put some bells up here if you go over time. Fiona, take it away.
So the HR manager rolls their eyes again. We've got another case. Is it going to end up in workers' comp? Is it going to end up in discrimination? Yes, it's another pickle stick we have to deal with. Hands up in the room. Who's currently managing a mental health work condition in their workplace? Or know of someone? I can't see because there's so many arms up. I feel it's sad still that we have to have this debate. It just shows how far we still have to go when it comes to really understanding mental health. It is the old cliche. First you have to understand before you can actually be understood. I guess I question why quickly we tolerate and forgive the employee with cancer who breaks the rules. However, when it comes to the relevance of illness, the rule breaker with depression, bipolar or anxiety, it then becomes a bit murky. It's easy to shoot at something you can't see. The facts, it's an illness. 1 in 5. 45% of Australian adults will experience mental health. It's biological, it can be genetic, it can be social, or it can be environmental. 2,866 people in 2016 passed away through suicide. In 2020, it's going to be the leading cause of disability. Why would we even question why we're not going to tolerate? How does it impact? How does an employee with mental health understand the logic of rules when inside they're fighting with their own head, when the mind tells you lies, when your world is black and scary, when sometimes just getting through the day is all you can really do? And you know what? That's hard enough. Mental health is here, it can be horrible, and it changes how people view their worlds. It needs to be considered and at times tolerated in matters of misconduct. So why are the symptoms? Why would you tolerate it? It changes how people think. It blurs the line between what is work, what is life. Their resilience changes. The mood changes. Decision-making abilities become unclear. There can be psychosis, hearing things. The reality is very different to the day you were before maybe the mental health changed. But it is an illness. When we talk about misconduct and code of conduct, we talk about discipline, there has to be intent. When someone has an illness and they break the rules, maybe there wasn't an intent, and maybe that's what we need to be more understanding of. There are risks if we don't tolerate. For those that manage your workers' comp, that's probably a prime one. There's also the fact of discrimination, and the fact that mental health is actually classified as a discrimination. And there's also the decision for the business as well that we need to consider. So as a HR practitioner, I do think we do need to show tolerance and understanding when managing someone that breaks the rules, maybe acts inappropriately. When it comes to mental health, we do need a level of tolerance. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Liz.
Okay, we're not completely heartless on the no side, just to clarify really early on in the piece. Thank you, Ross. You can go and stand outside. I suppose when we're looking at a serious breach of the code of conduct or serious misconduct, we need to look at the whole picture. It's not sufficient for an employee to come forward and say, yes, I punched my boss in the face, however, I have depression, so that's okay. It's not that simple. We need to consider mental health factors as we would any other mitigating factor when we're dealing with the employees. And there obviously needs to be a direct link between the mental illness and the serious breach. If that can't be established, then it's not simple enough to say, I suffer from mental health, therefore I can do whatever I want within the workplace. There have been an increasing number of matters going before the Commission dealing with exactly this. One recent matter before the Fair Work Commission involved an engineer working at an airport obviously on aircraft, and he had a very significant mental illness, and he had suffered psychosis and felt that the bosses were trying to kill him. In that case, the employer ultimately ended up terminating him because they felt that he breached the ability to follow a reasonable and lawful direction by refusing to change his roster. Now, if we look at the whole picture of this issue, this employee, in the preceding 12 months before he was terminated, had had 6 months off because of his mental illness. So the employer knew that there was an issue before we proceeded. The employer had also sent the employee for an independent medical examination, and they'd come back saying this employee suffers quite significantly, and these are things that we can do. And one of the things the employer was encouraged to do was to provide the employee with some consistency. So what they've gone and done is force him to change his roster. Now, the employer was not actually criticised for the termination. The employer was criticised by the Commission because they didn't manage it earlier on in the issue. So what they've done is they've let it continue on, and it's when it's got to the pointy end and that they felt there was a breach, that's when they decided to manage the issue. And that's sort of good enough. The issues need to be managed from the beginning, rather than letting it get to this end and then having the discussion of whether or not we should be tolerating misconduct simply based on the fact that there is a mental illness. It needs to be managed from the whole picture and obviously taken into consideration as a mitigating factor rather than an excuse.
Thank you, Liz. Now, Carlos, a response.
All right. I think basically it's an ethical question, isn't it? We have to decide what type of society we want to live in. And I think what's been happening in the last few hundred years, there's been a certain development in society that we think, or we hope anyway, with regards to acceptance of diversity and embracing difference. With mental health, the problem is that you can't get an X-ray and point at it and then decide this is what's going to happen. We're going to cut this out. And then you've got 6 months recovery and you'll be fine. We're all scared of mental health. I mean, who wants to work with someone that's erratic? But maybe if they're that bad, that person already has to consider their health first. This is not about the schizophrenic person who's on a lot of medication, whether they should be sacked or not. It's not about that. It's about us. It's about us. The normal, if you like, I love using that word, person who's going through a divorce or loses a loved one and starts suffering from reactive depression or anxiety because they've had a very traumatic event in their life that they can't help, and going to work and not being able to focus, being edgy, not being able to sleep, and that person, because they're not doing their job, is getting terminated. That's the person we're talking about here. We understand that the other type of person exists everywhere, and that person requires serious help. I like to talk about tolerate. I mean, we tolerate. Tolerate seems to be like a negative word. I think a better word would be not take into account, because that's what we want. When we interview someone, we don't ask them what religion they come from, they follow, whether what type of food they eat, sexuality, whether they're married. We shouldn't. I mean, some jobs, I suppose, they probably ask those type of things, but mental health is another one. So when we interview people, we're actually, people that are good at interviewing will be able to pick up whether that person is relatively stable, at least during the interview process. If that person becomes unstable and is not working and not fulfilling their duties, then that's a different issue. But their mental health shouldn't come into it. I think what happens is that we need to be role models. If our child comes back from school, says that they got bullied because their hair was funny, or because they're a bit large, or they talk funny, or they have a disability, we wouldn't want that in our society. And why do we want that type of stuff in our workplace? We're the role models. This is not about deciding whether I'm going to tolerate someone with a mental health. It's about putting in place laws so then those people, us, when we're in that situation, we're not discriminated against. It doesn't mean it has to happen on a daily basis that we have to tolerate someone being nasty to us. These are overall laws that do not take into account the person's mental health when given a job or use it as an excuse to be sacked.
Thank you, Carlos. Now, Joe.
Thanks, Ignatia. Well, it's going to be hard to follow. So a couple of things. I think neither party or neither side here has an easy debate. I don't think either side has an easy debate because there's no clear answers. But coming back to two things that my opponent said, Alice talked about the laws not accommodating people with mental health, and I think that's right. But I'm coming from a different angle, and I'll get to that. Now, I want to just revisit something Fiona said, and that is about the definition of serious misconduct. So I'm going to do a little bit of reading, which I don't normally do when I'm speaking, but serious misconduct, both in law and ordinary speech, is an act done willfully with wrongful intention and conveys the idea of wrongful intention. Whether a particular course of conduct will be regarded as misconduct is to be determined from the nature of the conduct and not from its consequences. It's also been said to mean wrongful, improper or unlawful conduct motivated by premeditated or intentional purpose or by obstinate indifference to the consequences of one's act. I can provide cases if you want. A serious breach of the code of conduct will likewise require a degree of intent or will, and accordingly attract the same degree of culpability. So on one view, in its purest form, if mental health of an offender is the cause of the conduct, then it cannot technically meet the definition of serious misconduct, given it will not meet the necessary requirements to have been deliberate or willful. The question therefore defeats itself. Serious misconduct isn't tolerated in the workplace if mental health is the cause, because it can't be serious misconduct if mental health was the cause. In the context of criminal law, where an offence requires a mental element to be proven, an alleged offender's mental health is taken into account, and an offender can be found to have been not guilty by reason of mental health. However, there are still ramifications for individuals in these circumstances. In the most serious case, this can still involve a form of incarceration and can be for some time. In the civil context, if an employee's mental health is the cause of their conduct, in a textbook case, this will result in the employee not only being exonerated from the conduct, but the employer now having to consider what adjustments it needs to make to accommodate that employee's condition. As always in the workplace, in the world of humanity, everything comes in degrees. And accordingly, today's question is more about whether the conduct should be tolerated if caused by mental health. The short answer is no, for a range of reasons. Firstly, it will be impossible to determine it will often be impossible to determine if a particular mental health issue is actually the cause. Now, medical practitioners can be part of the problem. The debate around this in every circumstance will usually involve the subjective views of the medical practitioner. It's their job to advocate on behalf of patients, without particular obligations to consider the challenges or interests of the employer or the other employees in the workplace, even when they are pressed to answer those questions. Without medical expertise, the process is rendered legally risky, operationally challenging, and often expensive for an employer to manage. The circumstances can range from, on one hand, situations involving doctors who assist their patients by providing an excuse, when you know deep down that that mental health issue is not really the reason they behave that way. And on the other hand, situations where the conduct has clearly been caused by mental health, and the employer is left with an impossible situation of returning the employee to the workplace against the background of almost unmanageable legal and safety risks. Or alternatively, not returning the employee only to face an alternative range of legal risks in terms of discrimination and a range of other legal actions that any lawyer might conjure. I have a real life example to present that might provide for some questions later on. This is an actual case, of course, not on record. An employer is in an enterprise bargaining negotiations with an employee bargaining team and the union. Heated negotiations ensue. One employee bargaining representative explodes during the meeting, and in losing it, he threatens the lives of everyone on site. Says, "I'm going to shoot you all." The employees on the site know he's got a gun and a gun licence. So in Queensland.
Important detail.
The employer is made aware that the employee has bipolar disorder and accepts that after the medical evidence is obtained that the conduct wholly arose as a result of a bipolar episode. A rare occurrence for some bipolar managing their illness well. And this was the case in this case. The challenge here is that you have a work site with employees who are at risk of being mentally impacted by the employee's return. An almost impossible task for this employer to try and manage, and have made their anxious concerns known to their employer. The employer also accepts without reservation that the employee is now fit to return to work. I present that conundrum to you right now without a solution, because there was none. But as a prime example of why mental health cannot be tolerated in the matters of serious misconduct or serious breaches of the code, the only answer is legislative change to clarify when a properly diagnosed illness should be considered as a tolerating factor, and an adequate safety defence in the discrimination laws to ensure health and safety of other employees without risking offending discrimination laws. Thank you.
We've got a bit of time up our sleeves, so first of all, I'll just invite either side to make some concluding remarks, particularly the affirmative. You haven't really had a chance to respond to Joe. Is there anything extra you'd like to add?
Just give me the microphone. No, look, I think you know, that was a very interesting case, and I think your points around the legislation and the requirement for more clarity around the legislation and how we would actually put that in a practical sense into the workplace. I guess thinking about mental health, and you know, I guess the reason for the wording of tolerance, that was the argument of the debate. I think what type, and I think Carlos sort of mentioned it as well, there is that sense of compassion, it is an ethical question, and it is about humanity as well. I think the prevalence of mental health in the workplace, I think the range of matters that occur from a code of conduct perspective or a breach of misconduct does still ensure that as an individual and as a HR practitioner or a manager or a supervisor, a level of tolerance and understanding before determining action and consequence arranged as part of mitigating circumstances as well.
Thank you. Anything further?
Yeah, look, I wanted to say a lot more. We only have 5 minutes. About this issue about the legislation, it is really an issue. I think we're on common ground there. What we've got when you've got a matter like this, if you've got a range of different risks for the employer and the employees, the other employees on site, you've got the health and safety laws, you've got the discrimination laws, you've got the unfair dismissal laws and the workers' comp laws. None of those laws line up with each other. They overlap at varying points, but they do not align with each other. So if an employee cannot come back to the workplace and you've done a risk assessment, and that risk assessment suggests that it's an unacceptable, unmanageable risk to bring a person back to the workplace, and you don't bring them back to the workplace, then that will not guarantee you a defence in discrimination proceedings. You'll go along to the ADT, the NCAT these days, or the Anti-Discrimination Board, the Human Rights Commission, and the first thing the conciliator will tell you when you raise the safety defence is, oh, you know, that's not really a very good defence. And it's an entirely unsatisfactory situation where none of these laws line up with each other. I'm not so worried about the unfair dismissal laws, that's all about bucket of grey, that jurisdiction. But, and I'm okay with it, it's quite a fun jurisdiction, but not when we're dealing with mental illness. And then we've got the workers' comp laws, which we had a problem with in that particular scenario I gave you, because if we brought this individual back to the workplace, he's entirely fit, we accepted he was fit to come back to the workplace. Those other people who the employer had done their best to convince them, they educated them about bipolar disorder, they got permission to share the medical evidence from the individual who had been impacted. But you can't force someone to allay their own psychological fears. You cannot force it. And there's no reasonable person test under the workers' compensation laws. So if you bring that individual back to the work site, and there are 4 people who go out on workers' comp psych claims, those are valid psych claims that will succeed against your organisation. So you can see the laws just don't line up. And if you don't bring him back to the workplace, because he has a mental illness, which is not impacting his ability to do his job, you face unlimited damages if he goes off to the Human Rights Commission and then to the Federal Court, the Federal Circuit Court. So it's an entirely unsatisfactory state of affairs. Now, in that scenario, I'll tell you what happened in the end. What happened in the end was that we negotiated his exit. And it was done as nicely as it possibly could be. They did accept that he had this mental illness. I mean, obviously they weren't happy, but it was apparent immediately to the employer that the cause of his conduct was his outburst was his mental illness. So they didn't blame him for that. It was about having to be able to return him to the workplace safely for everyone.
Thank you, Joe. Now, we've got some time to open it up to the floor for some questions, and I've just been told that Carlos has some books that we may be able to give away. If you've got a particularly good question, you might get lucky.
Hands up.
We've got one back in the back.
Yeah, so where I work, I put in a lot of mental health first aid training and really trying to get that message across. But what I find is that's very much, I find that's, it's very much surface level and it hasn't really permeated into the cultural understanding of managers and supervisors. And mental health really needs to be seen almost as a physical ailment in the same way. So, it's an illness. When I talk to people about applying for jobs, and this isn't at my council, this is friends, I do tell them to not disclose their mental health because I believe that there's such a stigma with it. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are when it's actually really accepted in the workplace. If you had applications and one has, mental health issues, bipolar, but there's a lack of understanding that, this is treated with medication. People are very discriminatory. So I'm just curious on what your thoughts are of when this will be an acceptable illness in the workplace when people aren't discriminated.
Who? Me?
Anyone who has an answer, I think? Or
Anyone in particular? Do you want to ask? Oh, all of you. I think that's more. I think that's more for you guys.
Finished their mic, so can someone pass the mic up to Joe?
Oh yeah, you got the mic.
Look, I probably have a similar experience as well, and I think that's why we're here, because I don't think there is a level of true acceptance. I think there's certainly a lot of awareness, and you're right, on a superficial level, we probably, do we all do Are You OK campaigns? Do we all do Beyond Blue? We all know about Black Dog Institute. Some of us are probably doing Movember. But we still have a stigma when someone walks into your office and says, I need to talk to you, I'm struggling with depression at the moment, I'm not managing it really well, I need your assistance. And I think on an individual level, that's being managed really well. But as a general culture, and I don't think it's just local government, I think it's still everywhere. I don't think we're there yet, and I think definitely we're heading in the right direction. But it is seen as this hidden part, and it's scary because we don't know how to manage it, or we don't know how to respond to it properly, or because you can't see it and people generally don't want to talk about it. I'm going to talk a little bit about gender here. There's a big difference between male depression and female depression. If we look around, who are generally our leaders, and look, I'm a female leader in my organisation, but predominantly, and it is changing, it has been a culture where males have been the leaders of organisations, the non-talkers, the ones that don't want to show emotions, the ones that think they can fix everything and control everything. And when it comes to mental health illness, you can't do that. But we're still branching out from that stigma and really trying to get that true acceptance. Everyone applauds a really important person that comes out in the media and says, I'm going to put my hand up because I suffer depression. And we all probably sit there in our living rooms and watch it and go, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you came out and did that. But we're not taking it to that next level. I don't know what the answer is. I still think we've still got a long way to go as far as that true acceptance that we have for physical illnesses. When someone does have a physical disability that you can see, or has an illness that we all know about, because in some ways it's easier to talk about it. So that's purely, I guess I certainly do share where you're coming from. I don't have the answers, they're just my thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think there's a few things to be said about that. One of the things Carl said really stuck with me about it being a moral issue. I think that if everyone, I'm not just talking about the leaders in this room, I'm talking about everyone in the workplace realised it was a moral issue, it'd be less, it would be more than skin deep. Everyone would realise that we need to be more proactive about it. And then we can start getting into understanding better and benefiting more from training and other techniques that are implemented in the workplace to manage these issues. Everyone would be aware of the New South Wales Mentally Healthy Workplaces program that's been they've been working on for a number of years now. If you don't go to the Safe Work website and have a look, they've got their mentally healthy workplaces strategy there. But I think we also need, I think if people take a moral view, we'll also weed out those people that think it's okay to hide behind a medical certificate, because that's part of our problem. Our problem is that bad apples that poison the barrel. And at the other end of the spectrum, what happens is then that starts, the attitude towards those which is warranted, then starts to leach into the attitude towards the people that do have genuine mental illnesses, and it becomes really easy not to manage those individuals. So, as we've all agreed, I think, with the current state of the law, the current state of play in workplaces outside of the law, it's not satisfactory. The way if I don't advise individuals because we're owned by the New South Wales Business Chamber and we only act for employers, but I did have a friend of mine call me earlier this year actually, and asked me about his sister, who had also had bipolar disorder. She was a high-flying consultant working with one of these really big international companies, earning a pile of money as a consultant. She wasn't employed. And he called me and said she's had an episode that's really unusual. She hasn't had one for 10 years. And that's the typical story, actually, with people with bipolar. They only have one every 10 years or something. It's not very often in most cases. So it's manageable. You wouldn't terminate someone's employment for that. But he was really worried about how he managed it. So one of the things I would tell people if I was regularly advising individuals is actually tell your employer, be as open as you can in those circumstances. So I advised him to be very open. I said, I think, go and get some legal advice, but my view would be, tell them everything, because she's going to be out of work for at least 6 weeks. You're about to go and tell them that she's sick. And in 2 weeks' time, they're going to wonder where she is. And you'll say, oh, she's still sick. And then in 2 weeks' time after that, they're going to wonder where she is, and they're going to say, she's still sick. 4 weeks out of the workplace is a serious illness. They've got the entitlement under the common law at that point in time to understand what's wrong with that person. Be proactive, tell them, say it's a manageable condition, and educate them at the same time. So if you provide the education, you're giving them every chance to understand that it's a manageable condition and should be back at work, according to the doctors, in 6 weeks' time. They can plan from an operational perspective to manage that 6 weeks' absence. She has some protection under the law then. Because if they say, look, we're terminating her because she's absent, or they start asking questions about her medical illness, and she refuses to provide that information, then she might be dismissed for disciplinary reasons. Because we all know the privacy laws don't extend to protecting a person providing that information when it's reasonable for the employer to ask for that information. She made a return to work after 6 weeks and kept working on it, was fine. Nothing happened. But I would think, you mentioned people not disclosing. I think that just, sure, don't walk into a workplace and if it's not necessary to announce you've got bipolar disorder, if you've got it, because it's probably not necessary. But if it does become an issue, then my view is openness is actually a better way to build trust. So another issue is trust between employees and employers. There's a real issue around trust. And if we can build trust, which can also be managed with a comment about it's being a moral issue as well, I think we're well on the way to trying to solve some of the challenges that our society faces in this space.
Thank you. Now, I think we've got time for one, maybe two more questions.
More of a comment.
Hi. Mine's not so much a question rather than the fact that I have been diagnosed with severe anxiety disorder, which falls under the banner of the mental illness. So from my perspective, as a HR manager, I've probably got a bit of an understanding of how it works and how it affects you as an individual. But under the umbrella of mental health, there's so many different. Just because I have anxiety, I don't have depression. I don't have bipolar. I'm not schizophrenic. But never through all of my treatment, all of my strategies to deal with it, did I not understand the difference between right and wrong. So dealing with, you have to deal with the individual, what they've been diagnosed with. And I don't think we've got enough support either through the law, legislation or anything to be able to do that until we understand the difference between each title, whatever you want to call it. We're all different and we all deal with it differently. So from someone who suffers, has it under control, hasn't had a severe attack in 5 or 6 years, it's just a case by case.
Thank you. Does anyone have a comment or something?
I wouldn't mind. Yeah. Well, you've done very well today on the mic for someone with anxiety. Usually people with severe anxiety avoid the microphone. So obviously you've worked hard on yourself. And you're right, mental health, the problem with that term is that it's too broad. It's too broad. Really, all of us here, at some stage of our lives, if I opened the DSM, I think it's 5 now, isn't it, or something, TR, I guarantee 100% that each one of us will fall into a category at one stage of our lives. When we were angry, when we didn't sleep that day, when we were suffering from a great deal of sadness, which might fall into depression, we were very nervous about something, could fall into anxiety. There's many things we've made egotistical decisions for ourselves, probably narcissistic and, you're probably borderline personality disorder, which is pretty much just another word for someone being very, very difficult to work with. So we have all these terms now for people, and that if they fall into that category, then it's a mental disorder. But if they can't do their job regardless of the situation, then it's not good for that person to do the job. It's not good for the organisation. It's a two-way thing. And I agree 100%. We have to filter out the people that have the illnesses and people that fall into it some stage of their life, like all of us do, that we feel things because we're human. There's two aspects of being human. One is happiness, the other is suffering. You can't escape that. And there's going to be times where we're sad, there's going to be times where we're happy. Now, the majority of us, we function still. The people that can't function, they need to get treatment, just like you did, and now you're functioning great. But for the others, the ones that don't get treatment, I agree 100%. I'm in the pro side. But if that person doesn't take responsibility and makes good decisions, like you said, I like that. You took responsibility. And in the end, that's what it's about. It's not about mental health. It's about deciding to take responsibility for the job you're doing, regardless of the obstacles you have in your lives. You can call them mental health, you can call them whatever you like. There's a lot of people that have disabilities, either mental, physical, language issues, come from very, very difficult upbringings that have done very, very well for themselves. A lot of people with mental health issues have been our leaders, our artists, our musicians, many people. So if those people weren't given the opportunity, they probably wouldn't have changed history. People like Napoleon and Vincent van Gogh and so forth. There's also Virginia Woolf, just for the women out there as well. There's also just the added thing that they also took responsibility and they decided that that was not going to affect their life. That's really what it's about. There's going to be people that don't have mental issues that aren't motivated enough to work well. And that is something we've got to differentiate.
Can I just, on that, Carlos, just taking that a little bit further, changing perspectives and prejudices, like that's something that comes out of your book, but picking up on something Joe said, how important is it, I guess, to understand a person's perspective that has a mental health issue? And is it the case that there are some, if you like, incidents that can occur in the workplace where work health and safety dictates to the point that you do pretty much have to say, well, look, understand you've got a mental health issue, but safety comes first and we need to take some decisive action. What do you say about that?
Well, perspective is everything, isn't it? The only thing that exists is our subjective reality, isn't it? That's what we can prove through our experiences, through what we hear, what we feel, what we see. The rest, is there an absolute reality out there? You know, some may say yes, but either way, we can't prove it. The only thing that we have is our perspective of things, our reality. It's an idealist type of approach. So some people believe that objectivity exists, but all scientists, even scientists, will tell you that it doesn't really. There's always a perspective of the scientist doing the project. So absolute reality can't exist. Now, that person, once they decide to say, I have bipolar, what they're doing is they're falling into a category that most people can understand, but it might not necessarily be true. I've had many patients which have been misdiagnosed. And bipolar is a very good one because a lot of GPs decide that people have bipolar and they're not trained like psychiatrists may be in order to do that. So these people carry that. And what happens is that once there's an issue at work, they may use that, and I agree 100%, they may use that as a bit of a walking stick in order to get through. But what my experience is that most people that really have the mental health issues do not talk about it openly and will not use it as I suppose something to be considered for their behaviour. And so just to round off, what we sometimes with these type of debates we get lost in making the individual as the whole picture, in the sense, looking at an individual as, okay, this person has a mental health disorder, this person is gay, that person is a Muslim, that person is black, that person, and so we have as a danger in not realising that an individual is formed by many segments of their life. And that's just one tiny one. What about all the other ones? Is that person a good person? Are they taking responsibility for their work? Are they functioning well? Is this an out of character type situation? And I think we have a danger of falling into that type of stereotypical thinking, and that's what we can't do. We need to, I agree, look at mental health in subdivisions, in order of severity, and then understand, philosophically speaking, that regardless of what it is, that's just one part of that individual. It doesn't make them.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Now, I'm just going to close up now. We've had a great debate, and I think it's probably from both sides. We've produced a lot of food for thought and things for us to take away. Now, we're about to break for morning tea for 30 minutes, which will be in the exhibition area. After that, we'll be returning for some workshop sessions. Now, we've got session A, which will be in ballroom 1, and that is development using the local government capability framework for workforce management and employee development. And that's going to be presented by Sarah Artis and Sophia Simeon. Thank you. Session B will be in ballroom 2. Now, that is building a high-performance organisational culture through teams. That's going to be presented by Samantha Sharkey and the team from Camden Council. And session C, which will be in ballroom 3, industrial relations, a guide to performance management and termination of employment, which will be presented by Charles McElroy, one of local government New South Wales senior industrial officers. Okay, if we can all be back at 10:45 sharp.
Can I also just again ask everyone to give the panel, and particularly also Carlos, who I forgot to thank this morning. Thank you very much. Carlos, you did mention that you had some prizes or books. How do you want to deal with that? I'll hand that over to you.
Well, it depends. After reading it, you might not think it's a prize. But I've got a few here, so if you're interested, I'll sign a couple. Yeah.
All right, thanks very much. Cheers, thanks guys. Oh, and so the signing, will we do that just outside?
Yeah.
You or no, just outside.
All right.